Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're tackling something that, if you own a home in Western Pennsylvania, is probably one of your biggest nightmares: water damage. It happens fast, it's total chaos, and honestly, if you don't know your next move, it can completely wreck your property. We're going to break down the actual science of what happens when a home floods, zooming in on the unique traps waiting for folks in Plum, Pennsylvania, and the surrounding Allegheny County communities.
Because here's the reality. When water invades your house, you don't have weeks to figure out a game plan. You don't even have a few days. You literally have 48 hours. It's a ticking clock, and every single minute pushes your home closer to secondary damage, structural rot, and some seriously hazardous mold. The urgency here is absolutely off the charts, and figuring out how to beat that clock is exactly what we're going to uncover today.
Okay, let's take a quick look at our roadmap. We'll be covering the unique geographical risks in Plum, the 48-hour mold window, decoding water damage categories, the science of drying, and finally, how to navigate those tricky insurance claims. Let's dive right into Section 1, Unique Risks in Plum, Geography and Infrastructure.
If you live around here, your house is basically fighting a battle on multiple fronts. First off, freeze-thaw pipe bursts. They're incredibly common in Allegheny County. Then you've got neighborhoods like Holiday Park or Plum Borough sitting on really clay-heavy soil. That clay acts like a giant sponge, holding on to water during spring thaws and summer downpours, and literally pushing groundwater right through your foundation cracks. Surprise indoor swimming pool, anyone? On top of that, homes near Plum Creek face some severe runoff flooding when storm drains just get totally overwhelmed. And if you're in the older areas, say near the Penn Hills border or off Salzburg Road, you're dealing with aging cast iron drain pipes that are silently corroding from the inside out. Talk about a perfect storm, right?
And you know, Western Pennsylvania is practically famous for its wild weather swings. We go from summer to winter, temperatures plummeting below 20 degrees, freezing up the water inside the lines. But the real nightmare? That happens when we transition from winter to spring. The weather can rapidly spike into the 40s in a single 24-hour window. That massive sudden expansion and contraction, it just physically tears copper and PVC joints apart, dumping hundreds of gallons of water straight into your walls.
Which brings us to Section 2, the 48-hour mold window, a race against time.
Listen, this isn't just about your stuff getting a little wet. It is a rapidly escalating biological event. In hour 1, water is already actively wicking up your drywall and soaking deep down into the carpet padding. By hour 24, your insulation is completely saturated, and we're looking at structural rot starting to compromise your framing. And then, we hit hour 48. In Plum's humid climate, 48 hours is literally all it takes for mold colonization to officially kick off in those dark, damp wall cavities. It spreads like wildfire.
So what's the magic number to stop this? 90 minutes. Because of that terrifying 48-hour window, local restoration experts, like the teams over at Reliance Water Damage Restoration Pittsburgh, they operate on a strict 90-minute emergency response standard. If they don't get those massive truck-mounted extractors into your house within an hour and a half, the water just sits there, it wicks further, and that secondary damage, the warped floors, the ruined insulation, the massive mold bloom, it pretty much becomes unavoidable.
Let's move to Section 3, Decoding Water Damage Categories. Know your enemy.
Before we get into the categories themselves, there's a term you really need to know: IICRC-certified. This is the official industry standard for professional water damage restoration. It's the hardcore scientific protocol that separates an actual certified remediation technician from, just some guy hauling a wet-dry shop vac into your basement. The IICRC standard lays out exactly what safety gear is mandatory and what specific drying methods have to be used based entirely on how contaminated the water actually is. And there is a massive difference between these contamination levels. Category 1 is your clean water, say from a snapped supply line under your sink. It poses no immediate health risk. But, and this is a huge but, if you let Category 1 water just sit there for 48 hours, bacterial growth turns it into Category 2. Then, on the complete opposite end of the spectrum, you have Category 3, or black water. This is the truly gross stuff. We're talking heavily contaminated sewage backup or outdoor floodwater from a rising creek. Category 3 requires full hazmat protocols, heavy-duty antimicrobial treatments, and the complete tear-out of porous materials like drywall and carpet. You do not mess around with Category 3.
So picture this. You've got thousands of gallons of water, varying levels of gross contamination, and that 48-hour clock ticking away in the background. The visible water is absolute chaos, sure, but it's actually the moisture you can't see that destroys a house. So how do we stop the invisible threat trapped deep inside the walls?
Well, that brings us to Section 4, the science of drying, the antidote.
Professional restoration is not guesswork. It is a highly methodical 3 to 7 day scientific process. Step 1 is emergency extraction, using those huge truck-mounted units to literally pull thousands of gallons out as fast as possible. Step 2 is structural drying. Now, this isn't just propping a window open. We are talking about the strategic, mathematical placement of commercial dehumidifiers and high-velocity air movers to force trapped moisture out of the framing. And step 3 is final verification. Technicians actually use thermal imaging cameras and precise moisture meters to physically prove that the invisible threat is gone for good.
And they definitely aren't just guessing when a room feels dry. They have exact metrics they have to hit. Before a house in Pennsylvania is legally and structurally safe to be closed back up with brand new drywall, the wood framing absolutely must reach a safe moisture content target of 15% or below. For concrete, which they verify using a calcium carbide test, it has to drop down to 4.5% or below. If you fail to hit those exact numbers, any reconstruction you do will just trap that leftover moisture inside and start breeding mold all over again.
Which perfectly highlights this quote from our source material. Other companies show up with a shop vac and a fan. We bring industrial equipment designed for complete water removal and structural drying. Seriously, DIY solutions and standard household tools are just going to fail to reach that deep structural moisture. A shop vac is never going to pull water out of a completely saturated floor joist. You absolutely need industrial dehumidification if you want to save a home's structural integrity.
All right, moving to our final phase, Section 5, navigating insurance claims, the paperwork. Okay, the very first thing you've got to wrap your head around is how insurance adjusters actually view damage. They draw a super hard line between covered disasters and excluded damage. Covered disasters are sudden. They are accidental. Think of a pipe freezing and bursting in the middle of the night, or a washing machine hose suddenly snapping. Excluded damage, on the other hand, is all about time. If you have gradual neglect, like a slow dripping leak you ignored for 6 months, or ongoing foundation seepage from that clay-heavy soil we mentioned earlier, your claim is almost certainly getting denied. Oh, and external flooding from a nearby creek, that requires a totally separate flood insurance policy altogether. Now, if you want to seamlessly push an insurance claim through, there is specific documentation your restoration company has to provide. You're going to need thermal imaging photos to prove exactly where the water migrated. You need daily moisture readings to track the drying progress. You need incredibly detailed equipment logs showing exactly what dehumidifiers were running and for exactly how long. And finally, you need those IICRC remediation certificates. Having all this pro-level documentation doesn't just get your claim approved either. Under Pennsylvania disclosure laws, providing certified clearance reports actively protects your home's resale value if you ever decide to put it on the market. It's basically your proof that the house is safe. So, we've covered a lot today. We've walked through the unique local risks, the terrifying biology of mold, the actual science of structural drying, and the really strict rules of insurance. But at the end of the day, it all comes back to how quickly and methodically you respond when disaster strikes. So I want to leave you with this final critical thought about your own home. If your pipes burst tonight, are you prepared to beat the 48-hour clock?